Sometimes I wonder if people even care about the truth. The story of Othello, which I read long time ago, but I only recently saw the play, is one of a black man who is in a position of power and is being played around by one of his trustees who tries to set everyone close to him against him. This trustee clearly does not like him for who he is, a black Moor. But this Moor, for some reason, is being touted around as if we do not know what his skin color was like. And they say, well, we don't have enough evidence to know what William Shakespeare meant. Well, what could he have possibly meant by this sentence in which the trustee of Othello is trying to make his wife Desdemona seem like she is breaking from Othello's trust? As we read, by the world I think my wife be honest, and think she is not. I think that thou art just, and think thou art not. I'll have some proof. Her name, that was afresh as Dian's visage, is now begrimed and black as mine own face. I'll say it again. I'll have some proof. Her name that was as fresh as Dian's visage is now begrimed and black as my own face. Now, that is not a racial thing. That's him saying his face is literally black. So how do they skip over things like this? By the way, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this whole book where they refer to him as a black person, not just by the word Moor, meaning they're not just going after his general racial classification, but calling him a black person, like he just called himself in this phrase. As we read from worldshake.ru, a Russian encyclopedia, Othello inspired people like Alexander Pushkin, who himself was related in descendancy to Moors, black Moors, who had also been attacked for who they were, and was written in a book called The Blackamoor of Peter the Great. This Russian had multiple descendants who had done great things, and he was no exception. And this is what he writes, or this is what they write about what he thought. Alexander Pushkin's interpretation of the tragic hero. Pushkin perceived the tragedy of the Moor very personally. This may have been related to the family rumor according to which his great-grandfather Abraham Petrovich Gannibal had also suffered from the pangs of jealousy, mentioned in his descendants' unfinished story, The Blackamoor of Peter the Great, 1827 to 29. Bearing in mind Pushkin's own jealous and fiery nature, we may well suppose what he suffered when observing the way Tsar Nicholas I showed benevolence towards Natalia Pushkina, or the glances of high society lions. Subsequently, Pushkin's own intense perception of honor led him to his untimely death. The most famous contemporary response in verse put it like this: the bard is killed, the honor striver. Pushkin's involvement with the character of Othello was not all personal and intimate. It was part of his reflections about Russian and world literatures. Thus, in his draft essay on national spirit in literature, 1826, Pushkin praises the English playwright's work as truly expressive of the national character. Alexander Pushkin comments on the fact that a young white woman falling in love with an old black man is a deep story, and that William Shakespeare had to go deep in order to find such a story, which could only be done by observing the world and the world's literature. Now, I don't know what that means about the literature of the world, but I do know that Alexander Pushkin also used or borrowed some things from Othello in order to write some of his stories. But this is not about Alexander Pushkin. It seems to me obvious that most commentators who talked about Shakespeare's play thought and assumed that the Moor was a Negro, and only in modern times has he been browned, basically clearing his skin. And for what reason? Well, it's the same reason why they clear their skin everywhere and why the word black never means black. It means everything but black if you ask certain people. But there is another way to tackle this conversation because, of course, William Shakespeare didn't live alone in Europe. There were other Europeans who painted Moors. As you can see in this illustration, Titian, or Tiziano Vesilia, an influential Venetian painter, paints this Moor, and you can see that this person is absolutely of African stock. And so does Albert Dürer, a German Renaissance artist. Hieronymus Bosch does the same, and Paolo Veronese. Hans Holbein, the younger, does the same as well. If we look at the Magi, we can see here this is typical of Renaissance art, where they paint one of the Magi as a black person reflecting the three continents. Now, I want you to keep that in your head, reflecting the three continents. Africa, represented by a black man. Asia, represented by an Asian. And Europe, represented by European. No amount, no thought, no tilt of thought to make him a North African. Now, there is some people who say these were due to bias or whatever, that the Moors were being depicted as black people, not because they were black, but because they were extreme. They wanted to show the most extreme. Now, this doesn't make any sense, but let's engage with this idea. Well, if this is true of people in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, why wouldn't this be true of Shakespeare? Why would Shakespeare be completely free of this bias? I remember seeing this book the first time and thinking, I can't see any black Moors in here. That's strange. Until I realized something. This book by Alfonso X has nothing to do with Moors. Instead, it depicts games introduced by Arabs, and it even writes as much. Arabs and Turks. Oh, and one more thing. Anyone who knows how to draw knows that you can't just imagine accurate body morphage or morphology. You have to have someone stand there and learn what the body looks like. So clearly, there were other black people in Europe as you can see, they use these people as models for their paintings. Who were these people exactly? They don't exactly look poor to me. They're definitely not slaves. So who were these people?